The ship came out of hyperspace with a soft hum, and Commander Park Dawn watched through the viewport as Villa 7 slowly grew larger. The station was ugly. There was no other word for it. It looked like someone had welded together 100 different ships and called it a home. Rust-colored metal mixed with black panels and glowing tubes that carried power from one section to another. Lights blinked in random patterns, and small transport ships moved around it like flies around rotting fruit. "That's our destination?" Yoon Hana asked from beside him. She was younger than Dohan by almost 10 years, with sharp eyes and a quick mind. Her job was to understand alien languages and help with communication, but Dohan had learned that she was good at understanding much more than just words. "That's it," Dohan said. Velar 7, the most famous trading outpost in this sector. "It looks like a garbage pile. A very profitable garbage pile." Dohan turned away from the viewport and checked his uniform one more time. Clean, pressed, professional. "Remember why we're here. The colony on New Bizen needs grain. Their last harvest failed because of the soil sickness. If we don't get this trade deal done, 40,000 people will go hungry." Hana nodded, her face becoming serious. "I understand, Commander. Negotiate. Be polite. Don't cause problems." Exactly. Their ship, a small diplomatic vessel named the Horizon, docked at one of the station's many ports. The airlock opened with a hiss, and immediately, Dohan noticed the smell. It was a mix of machine oil, alien sweat, and something that reminded him of wet animal fur. Not pleasant, but not the worst thing he had ever smelled. They stepped onto the station, and Dohan felt the artificial gravity pull at his boots. It was slightly stronger than Earth standard, which meant walking would be tiring after a while. He made a mental note to finish their business quickly. The docking area was crowded with aliens of many different species. Dohan recognized some of them from his training. There were the Pelori, small creatures with too many eyes and thin arms that moved constantly. There were the Mokhtar, tall and thin like walking sticks, their skin a deep blue color. There were others he didn't recognize. Strange shapes and colors moving through the crowd, but everyone moved the same way, quickly, quietly, with their eyes looking down at the floor. "Commander," Hana whispered, moving closer to him. "Something is wrong here." Dohan had noticed it too. On most trading stations, there was noise, shouting, bargaining, laughter, arguments, the sounds of business being done. But here, the only sounds were footsteps and the hum of machines. The aliens moved like they were afraid, like they were trying not to be noticed, and then Dohan saw why. They came around a corner, and suddenly the crowd parted like water around a stone. 3 massive creatures walked through the middle of the docking area. They stood over 2 meters tall, with thick bodies covered in what looked like natural armor. Their skin was gray-green, rough like the bark of a tree. Their faces were flat, with small eyes that glowed a soft yellow color, and their hands ended in claws that looked sharp, enough to cut through metal. Vretak. Duhan had read about them in his mission briefing. They were apex predators from a heavy-gravity world. Their entire culture was built around strength and dominance. They believed that the strong had the right to rule, and the weak existed only to serve. For the last 200 years, they had controlled Velar 7 and everything that happened on it. The 3 Vrethek walked slowly, their heavy feet making the floor shake with each step. They didn't look at anyone directly, but everyone looked at them. Or rather, everyone looked away from them, making sure not to meet their eyes. One of the Vrethek, the largest of the 3, stopped suddenly, his yellow eyes fixed on a small Pelori merchant who had been too slow to move out of the way. The Pelori froze, its May eyes blinking rapidly in fear. The Vrethek didn't say anything. He simply raised one clawed hand and made a small gesture, like he was brushing away a fly. The pillory immediately dropped to the ground, pressing its face against the metal floor. It stayed there, shaking, until the Rethok walked past. Only then did the pillory dare to stand up again. Dohan saw that its eyes were wet. It was crying. "They're not traitors," Hana said quietly, her voice tight with anger. "They're tyrants." Dohan watched the three Rethok disappear into the crowd, which closed behind them like a wound healing. Everyone went back to moving quickly and quietly, their eyes on the floor. "We're here for grain," Dohan said, keeping his voice calm. "Nothing more. We do our job, we leave, and we never come back." "And we just ignore what we saw?" Dohan looked at her. He understood her anger. He felt it too. But he had learned long ago that anger was a luxury that diplomats could not afford. "We're two humans on a station controlled by creatures who could tear us apart with their bare hands. What do you suggest we do? Start a war?" Hannah didn't answer, but her jaw was tight. They made their way through the station, following the directions that had been sent to their ship before arrival. Their trading contact was a merchant named Gorath, one of the Rethok elders. According to the information Dohan had received, Gorath was one of the more reasonable Rethok, willing to deal with other species as long as there was profit involved. The station's corridors were a maze of metal and pipes. There were no windows, no decorations, nothing that suggested anyone cared about making this place comfortable. It was purely functional, built for business and nothing else. As they walked, Dohan noticed something else. There were no children. No young aliens of any species playing in the corridors or following their parents. The only beings he saw were adults, all of them moving with purpose, all of them silent. "Where are all the young ones?" he asked a passing Mokhtar. The alien looked at him with surprise, as if no one had ever asked it a question before. "The young stay hidden," it said in a rough voice. "It is safer that way." Before Dohan could ask what it meant, the Mokhtar hurried away, disappearing into the crowd. Safer. The word echoed in Dohan's mind. What kind of place was this, where children had to hide to be safe? He pushed the thought away. Grain. Trade deal. Go home. That was his mission. That was all he needed to focus on. But deep inside, in a part of himself that he usually kept locked away, something was beginning to stir. It was an old feeling, something from his days as a soldier before he became a diplomat. A feeling that had kept him alive through 3 wars and countless battles. It was the feeling that told him when something was very, very wrong. And on Vilar 7, everything was wrong. The meeting with Gorath had been scheduled for the afternoon station time. That gave Dohan and Hana several hours with nothing to do. Dohan decided to use the time to learn more about the station. In his experience, understanding a place helped with negotiations. The more you knew, the better you could adapt. They walked through the station's central market, a large open area filled with stalls and tables where merchants sold everything from food to machine parts to things Dohan couldn't even identify. The smell here was stronger, a mix of strange spices and alien cooking. His stomach turned a little, but he ignored it. Hana was recording everything with a small device attached to her wrist. She was always collecting data, always learning. Dohan respected that about her. In a galaxy full of strange things, knowledge was the best weapon. "The prices here are very low," Hana said quietly as they passed a stall selling what looked like dried meat. "Much lower than other stations." "Cheap labor," Dohan replied. "When you control a population through fear, you don't have to pay them much. That's horrible. That's reality." They continued walking, passing stalls run by aliens of many different species. Dohan noticed that none of the stall owners called out to them, trying to attract customers. On other stations, merchants would shout and wave and promise the best deals in the galaxy. Here, they sat in silence, waiting for customers to come to them. It was like walking through a market of ghosts. Then, Dohan heard a sound that made him stop. It was a high-pitched cry, somewhere between a scream and a whimper. It sounded like pain. Real pain. What was that? Hana asked, looking around. The sound came again, and this time Dohan could tell where it was coming from. He moved quickly through the crowd, pushing past aliens who were all trying to move in the opposite direction. They were running away from the sound, not toward it. He came around a corner and saw a scene that would stay with him for the rest of his life. A nest of the rest of his life. A young Vrethik lay on the ground near a cargo bay. It was small, maybe the size of a human child of 5 or 6 years. Its gray-green skin was lighter than the adult's, almost soft-looking, and its leg was bent at an angle that legs should never bend. White bone poked through the skin, surrounded by dark blood. The cub was crying. Not the roaring sound that adult Vrethik made, but a thin, weak sound. The sound of a child in terrible pain. Around the cub, a circle had formed. Adult Vrethik stood watching, their yellow eyes cold and empty. They did nothing. They just watched. Why aren't they helping it? Hannah whispered, her voice shaking. Dohan didn't answer. He was watching the adults, trying to understand what was happening. One of them, an older Vrethik with scars on his face, stepped forward. Dohan recognized him from the information files. This was Gorath, the merchant they were supposed to meet. Gorath looked down at the crying cub. His face showed no emotion, no concern, no love, nothing. Let it learn, Gorath said, his deep voice carrying across the market. Pain is the first teacher. If it cannot stand, it is not worthy of standing. The other Vrethik made sounds of agreement. Low rumbles from deep in their chests. Dohan felt his hands curl into fists. He understood now. This was their culture. Their way. Among the Vrethik, weakness was shameful. A child that couldn't overcome its own pain was not worth saving. To help it would be to insult its bloodline, to suggest that it was too weak to survive on its own. The cub tried to stand. It pushed itself up with its small arms, its face twisted with effort. But the moment it put weight on its broken leg, it collapsed again, crying out in fresh pain, and the adults did nothing. Commander, Hana said, grabbing his arm. Her fingers were tight, almost painful. They're going to let it die. Dohan looked at the cub. It was so small, so helpless. Its cries were getting weaker now, its body shaking with shock. Without medical attention, it would die. Maybe not today, but soon. Infection would set in. The bone would never heal properly. And the Vrethak would consider this a lesson learned. Survival of the fittest. The strong live. The weak die. Every part of Dohan's diplomatic training told him to walk away. Do not interfere with alien customs. Do not impose human values on other species. Do not risk the mission. 40,000 people on New Bizon were counting on this trade deal. If he angered the Vrethik, the deal would fail. People would starve. Real people, human people, his people. He should walk away. He should. But the cub cried again, and the sound cut through Dohan like a knife. It was so similar to a human child's cry, so full of fear and pain and a desperate need for someone, anyone, to help. Dohan thought about his own childhood. His mother, holding him when he was sick. His father, carrying him when he was too tired to walk. The warmth of being loved, being protected, being valued not for strength, but simply for existing. This cub had none of that. It lay alone on cold metal, surrounded by its own kind. And not one of them would lift a finger to help, because that was their way. But it wasn't Dohan's way. Commander, Hana said again, her voice urgent. What are you doing? Dohan didn't answer. He was already moving forward, pushing through the circle of Vrethik. They were so surprised that they didn't stop him. No one ever pushed through a Vrethok circle. No one dared. He knelt beside the cub. Up close, he could see the damage more clearly. A compound fracture of the lower leg. Bad, but not impossible to fix. He had treated worse during his years as a combat medic, before the diplomatic corps recruited him. The cub looked up at him with yellow eyes wide with confusion. It had probably never seen a human before, and it certainly had never had anyone kneel beside it to help. "It's okay," Dahun said softly. "I'm going to help you." Behind him, he heard the sound of heavy footsteps. Golrith was approaching, and his footsteps sounded like thunder. "Human." The word was spoken like a curse. "Human, you dare touch what is not yours." Dahun kept his eyes on the cub. His hands were already moving, examining the wound, checking for other injuries. He could hear his own heartbeat. Fast, but steady. "The cub is injured," he said, keeping his voice calm. "I'm going to help. You will do no such thing." Golrath's shadow fell over him, blocking the light. "Step away from my bloodline, or I will open your throat." Dahun heard claws extending. A soft clicking sound like knives being drawn dot 40,000 people, he thought. But then he looked at the cub's face, twisted with pain, and he knew what he had to do. He had always known. Dahun stood up slowly. He kept his movements controlled, deliberate. Behind him, he could feel the cub watching, its small body still shaking with pain. In front of him stood Golrith, 2 meters of muscle and armor and claws that could cut through steel god every alien in the market had frozen. The Mokhtar, the Pelori, the species Dahun didn't recognize, all of them stood perfectly still, watching. They had never seen anything like this. A soft creature, a prey creature, standing in front of a Vrethok and refusing to move, thought it was unthinkable, thought it was impossible. And yet here was this human. This small pink thing with no claws and no armor and no natural weapons. Looking up at Golrith like he had every right to be there. "I said step away," Golrith growled. His voice was deeper now, rougher. A warning sound, the kind predators make before they attack. "This is not your concern, human. This is Vrethok business." "A child is dying," Dahun said. His voice was quiet but clear. "That's everyone's business. The cub is weak. Weakness must be burned away. This is our way. Your way is wrong." The silence that followed was absolute. No one moved. No one breathed. Dahun just told a Vrethok elder that his culture was wrong. On Velar 7, where the Vrethok ruled everything, that was a death sentence. Golrath's eyes narrowed to yellow slits. His claws, already extended, seemed to grow longer. The muscles in his arms tensed, ready to strike. "You have courage, human," Golrath said. "Foolish courage. But courage. I will make your death quick. A gift for your bravery." He raised his clawed hand, and Dahun roared. It came from somewhere deep inside him, from a place he had almost forgotten existed. It was not a scream. It was not a shout. It was something older, something primal. A sound that humans had been making for 100,000 years, since they were small and soft creatures on a dangerous world, surrounded by predators much bigger and stronger than themselves. It was the sound of a species that had refused to die. The roar echoed through the market, bouncing off metal walls and cargo containers. It was so loud, so unexpected, that Golrath actually took a step back. His raised hand froze in mid-air. For just a moment, something flickered in his yellow eyes. Something that looked almost like fear. "You think you are the only predators in this galaxy?" Dahun said. His voice was different now, harder, colder. The voice of a man who had seen war and survived. "You think because we are small, we are weak? Because we have no claws, no armor, we are prey?" He stepped forward. Golrath, the mighty Vrethok elder, did not step forward to meet him. He stayed where he was. My people hunted creatures 10 times our size, Dohan continued. We chased them across frozen wastelands until their hearts gave out. We built traps and weapons and strategies that turned the strongest predators into food for our children. We fought each other in wars that lasted generations, and we are still here. Another step forward. The space between them was shrinking. Do you know what makes humans dangerous, Golrath? It's not our strength. It's not our speed. It's our choice. We choose when to fight. We choose when to kill. And when we choose to protect something, nothing in this universe can stop us. Hannah had been watching in shock, but now her training kicked in. She pulled out her communication device and did something Dohan had not expected. She broadcast a file to every screen in the market. Every display, every terminal, every portable device suddenly showed the same images. Humans hunting mammoths with nothing but spears. Humans marching through deserts. Their feet bleeding, their bodies exhausted, but still moving forward. Humans climbing mountains that should have killed them. Humans surviving in jungles, in frozen wastelands, in places where nothing should survive. And then the wars. Humans fighting humans with terrible weapons. Entire cities burning, millions dying. Not because they were forced to, but because they chose to. Because when humans decided something was worth fighting for, they would burn the world to protect it. The final image was simple. A human soldier, small and bleeding, standing in front of a tank, refusing to move. Humans are persistent predators, Hannah's voice said over the market speakers. We do not stop. We do not tire. We do not forget. The broadcast ended, and silence returned to the market. Every alien was staring at the humans now with new eyes. The Mokhtar, the Pelori, all the species that had lived under Vrethik rule for so long, they were seeing something they had never seen before. A predator that chose to be kind. A predator that would fight not for food or territory, but for a child that was not even its own species. Golrath looked at Dawn, and for the first time in his long life, he felt uncertain. This human was small. This human was soft. But there was something in his eyes, something in the way he stood, that said he would not back down. Not ever. The cub, Dohan said, is coming with me to my ship. I have medical equipment there. I can save its life. And if I refuse? Dohan smiled. It was not a friendly smile. Then we find out which one of us is really the predator. The moment stretched. Golrath's claws were still extended. Dohan's hands were empty. By every logical measure, the Vrethik should win this fight. One strike would be enough to kill the human. But Golrath did not strike, because he had seen the images. He had heard the stories. And he had looked into this human's eyes and seen something that his kind had never faced before. A creature that would die before it surrendered. Slowly, very slowly, Golrath's claws retracted. The clicking sound was like a surrender. Take the cub, he said, his voice rough. But know this, human. You have made an enemy today. Maybe, Dohan said. Or maybe I've made you question everything you believe. He turned his back on Golrath, something no prey species had ever dared to do, and knelt beside the cub again. The small creature looked up at him with wide yellow eyes. Can you be brave for me? Dohan asked softly. Just a little longer? The cub nodded, a tiny movement. Dohan picked it up carefully, supporting its broken leg, and began to walk toward the docking bay. The crowd parted before him, aliens of every species moving aside to let him pass. Behind him, Golrath stood alone in the empty circle, his claws at his sides, watching the human carry away his air dot, and for the first time in 200 years, the pack was silent. The walk back to the horizon felt longer than the walk to the market. Dohan carried the cub against his chest, feeling its small heart beating fast with fear and pain. The creature weighed less than he expected, maybe 15 kilograms. Its gray-green skin was warm against his uniform, and up close, he could see that it was softer than the adults, not yet covered in the thick armor that would come with age. Hana walked beside him, her eyes moving constantly, watching for threats. The crowd parted before them, aliens stepping aside quickly, pressing themselves against walls and cargo containers to give the humans room. No one spoke. No one tried to stop them. The Doan could feel eyes on his back. Rethek eyes, yellow and cold, watching from the shadows. They were not done with him. He knew that. This was just the beginning. "Commander," Hana said quietly, "what you did back there was insane." "I know. You could have been killed. We could have lost the trade deal. 40,000 people. I know." Dohan kept walking, his eyes fixed on the corridor ahead. "But I couldn't just watch it die, Hana. I couldn't." She was quiet for a moment. Then, softly, she said, "I know. I couldn't have either." They reached the horizon without incident. The ship's airlock opened with a familiar hiss, and Dohan felt some of the tension leave his shoulders. They were not safe, not really, but the ship was human territory. Here, at least, they had some control. He carried the cub to the medical bay, a small room with basic equipment designed for treating human injuries. Rethek biology was different, but not so different that he couldn't work with it. During his years as a combat medic, Dohan had treated dozens of alien species. He had learned that bone was bone, blood was blood, and pain was pain. No matter what planet you came from. "Hold it still," he told Hana as he laid the cub on the medical table. The cub whimpered, its small claws scratching weakly at the table surface. Its eyes were half closed now, its body going into shock. Dohan worked quickly, his hands moving with the precision of long practice. He cleaned the wound, set the bone, applied a regenerative splint that would help the fracture heal. The cub cried out once, a sharp sound of pain. But then Dohan gave it something for the pain, and it relaxed. Its breathing becoming slower and steadier. "It's gonna be okay," Dohan said, more to himself than to anyone else. "It's going to be fine." An hour later, the cub was sleeping peacefully, its injured leg wrapped in bandages and held in place by the splint. Its small chest rose and fell with each breath, and its face, which had been twisted with pain, was now calm. Dohan sat in a chair beside the medical table, watching. He felt exhausted, like all the energy had been drained from his body. The adrenaline that had kept him going was fading, and in its place was a deep tiredness that went all the way to his bones. "What happens now?" Hana asked. She was standing by the door, her arms crossed. "I don't know," Dohan admitted. "We wait. We see what they do." What they did was unexpected. Within an hour, aliens began appearing at the horizon's airlock. First one, then two, then a dozen. They were not Rethek. They were the other species, the Mokhtar and the Pelori, and the others that Dohan didn't recognize. They came with gifts. Food wrapped in strange leaves. Small devices whose purpose Dohan couldn't guess. Information chips filled with data about the station, about the Rethek, about trade routes and secret deals. "What is happening?" Hana asked, looking at the growing pile of offerings. A Mokhtar stepped forward, its blue skin dark with emotion. "For 200 years, we have lived under their claws," it said, its voice rough with something that sounded like hope. "We thought there was no other way. We thought no one could stand against them." It looked at Dom with eyes that were wet with tears. "But you stood. You, a creature smaller than their children, stood against an elder and did not fall. You showed us something we had forgotten." "What?" "That it is possible to refuse." The word spread through Vela 7 like fire through dry grass. The human who defied the Vrethek. The human who roared. The human who carried away a cub and dared anyone to stop him. Every alien on the station heard the story, And every alien began to think thoughts they had never allowed themselves to think before. What if we didn't obey? What if we stood together? What if we refused? The Vrethik felt the change. They could not have missed it. The other species still moved aside when they walked, but there was something different now. A straightening of spines, a lifting of eyes. Small changes, almost invisible, but changes nonetheless. For the first time in 200 years, the prey was looking at the predators without complete fear. Goreth came to the horizon as the station's artificial night began. He came alone, which surprised Doan. A Vrethik elder, alone, approaching a human ship. It was almost unthinkable. Dohan met him at the airlock. They stood facing each other, the human and the Vrethik, two very different creatures who had both learned something new about each other. "The cub," Goreth said. His voice was flat, emotionless. "How is it?" "Sleeping. The bone is set. It will heal completely in a few weeks." Goreth nodded slowly. "You are a healer. I was a soldier first, then a healer, now a diplomat." Dohan met his eyes without fear. "We humans are many things. Yes, I am learning this." Goreth was quiet for a moment. "The cub is my heir, my bloodline's future. When it fell, I felt shame. A weak heir is no heir at all. That is what I have always believed. And now? Now I wonder if I have been a fool." The admission seemed to cost him something. His massive shoulders sagged slightly, and for just a moment, he looked old, tired, uncertain. "Your species," Goreth said slowly. "You protect your weak ones. You're injured. You're sick. This is true?" "Yes." "Why?" "They are a burden. They slow you down. They take resources that could go to the strong." Dohan thought about the question. It was not a simple one, because strength is not just about muscle and claws, he said finally. "The strongest person I ever knew was my grandmother. She weighed 45 kilograms and couldn't lift a heavy bag. But she survived a war, raised 5 children, and held our family together through things that would have broken anyone else." He looked at Goreth steadily. "Strength is also about love, about loyalty, about choosing to carry each other when we're too tired to walk alone. The weak become strong because the strong help them, and the strong stay strong because the weak give them something worth fighting for." Goreth said nothing for a long time. His yellow eyes were distant, looking at something Dohan couldn't see. Finally, he spoke. "I have much to think about, human. Perhaps too much." He turned to leave, then stopped. "The grain you came for. It will be delivered to your ship before you leave. 3 times the amount you requested. No payment required." Dohan blinked in surprise. "Why?" Goreth looked back at him. "Because you saved my heir when I would have let it die. In my culture, this creates a debt, one that I am not sure can ever be fully repaid." He walked away into the station's darkness, a massive figure that suddenly seemed somehow smaller than before, and Dohan stood at his airlock, watching him go, wondering what kind of future they had just created. 3 days passed on Velar 7. The cub, whose name Dohan learned was Koreth, healed faster than expected. Vrethik biology was remarkable that way. What would have taken a human child months to recover from, Koreth managed in days. By the 2nd day, it was sitting up. By the 3rd, it was walking with only a small limp, but Koreth refused to leave the horizon. "Why?" Dohan asked, kneeling beside the small creature. "Your family is waiting for you. Goreth has been asking about you." Koreth's yellow eyes, so different from human eyes, but somehow still expressing the same emotions, looked up at him with something like worship. "You saved me," it said. Its voice was high and soft, not yet the deep growl of adult Vrethik. "No one has ever saved me before. When I fell, I thought I would die. I was ready to die. But you came. I couldn't just leave you there. Why not? I am weak. I fell? By our laws, I deserve to be left. Dohan sat down on the floor, putting himself at Korath's level. Let me tell you something about humans, he said. A long time ago, before we had spaceships or medicine or even metal tools, we were weak. Really weak. We had no claws, no fangs, no armor. Every predator on our world could kill us easily. Korath listened, its small head tilted with interest. But we survived, Dohan continued. Do you know how? We worked together. When one of us was hurt, the others carried them. When one of us was sick, the others fed them. When one of us was weak, the others protected them until they were strong again. He smiled softly. We didn't survive because we left the weak behind. We survived because we refused to. And that made us stronger than any creature with claws or fangs or armor. Korath was quiet for a long moment. Then it said, I want to be strong like humans. You already are, Dohan said. You survived. You didn't give up. That takes more strength than you know. On the morning of the fourth day, it was time to leave. The grain had been loaded into the Horizon's cargo bay, more than enough to feed New Bizen's colony for a full year. The mission was complete. But as Dohan prepared the ship for departure, he knew that something much bigger than a trade deal had happened here. News of what had occurred at Velar 7 was already spreading. Hana had been receiving messages from other human ships, from colonies, from diplomatic stations across the sector. Everyone wanted to know about the human who had roared at a Vrethic elder. Everyone wanted to know if the stories were true. They were true. And they were just the beginning. Aliens from the station came to see them off. Not just a few this time, but hundreds. They lined the corridors leading to the docking bay, watching in silence as Dohan and Hana walked past. Some of them nodded. Some of them bowed. A few reached out to touch Dohan's shoulder as he passed, a gesture of thanks that needed no words. The Vrethic were there too, standing apart from the other species, but watching with those cold yellow eyes. Dohan could not tell what they were thinking. Maybe they were angry. Maybe they were confused. Maybe they were beginning to question everything they had ever believed. Change was like that. It started small, with a single moment, a single choice. And then it grew. Korath waited at the airlock, his massive form blocking the entrance. Korath stood beside him, looking healthier than Dohan had ever seen it. Its leg was fully healed now, the splint removed, no sign of the injury that had almost killed it. Human, Korath said. His voice was different somehow, softer than before. Before you leave, there is something that must be done. He stepped aside, and Korath walked forward. The small Vrethic stopped in front of Dohan and looked up at him with those yellow eyes that had once been filled with pain and fear, but now held something else. Entirely. Then Korath did something that made every Vrethic watching gasp with. Shocked, it pressed its small forehead against Dohan's. Hand in Vrethic culture. This was the highest gesture of respect. It was reserved for the greatest warriors, the wisest elders, the most honored leaders. It was never, ever given to a non-Vrethic. It was especially never given to a prey species. But Korath held the position, its forehead warm against Dohan's palm, and did not move. Thank you, Loud One, Korath said, using the name that had already begun to spread through the station. Thank you for my life. Dohan felt something tighten in his chest. He knelt down, slowly, carefully, until he was face to face with the cub. Get strong, little one, he said softly. And remember, strength isn't about ignoring pain. It's about choosing to stand anyway. It's about helping others stand when they can't do it alone. Korath nodded, a very human gesture that it must have learned during its days on the ship. Then it stepped back to stand beside Golrath. The elder Vrethok looked at Dawn for a long moment. Something passed between them, an understanding that went beyond words. They were not friends. They might never be friends. But they were something else now. Two creatures who had seen each other clearly and found something unexpected. "The galaxy will hear about this," Golrath said. "What you did here. How you stood. Is that a threat?" "No." Golrath's mouth moved in what might have been a smile. "It is a fact. The other species will hear. The other Vrethok will hear. Things will change because of what happened here." "Change isn't always bad," Dohan said. "No, it isn't." Golrath stepped aside, clearing the path to the airlock. "Safe travels, human. And know this, if you ever return to Vilar 7, you will be welcomed as a friend of my bloodline." Dohan nodded and walked onto his ship. Hannah followed, and the airlock closed behind them. As the horizon lifted off from the station and turned toward the stars. Dohan stood at the viewport, watching Villa 7 shrink into the distance. Behind him, Hannah was already writing reports, documenting everything that had happened. "Commander," she said, not looking up from her work, "do you think anything will really change?" Dohan thought about the question. He thought about the aliens who had brought gifts, the Vrethek who had watched in confusion, the cub who had pressed its forehead against his hand. "I don't know," he said honestly. "Change is slow. It takes time. But I think we planted a seed today. What grows from it? That's up to them." The ship entered hyperspace, the stars stretching into lines of light, and Valar 7 disappeared from view. But the story was already spreading. Ships carried it to other stations, other worlds. Aliens whispered it to each other in markets and meeting halls. Humans heard it and smiled with something like pride. The story of the human who roared. The story of the predator who chose mercy. The story of the cub who was saved by a creature that should have been prey. And across the galaxy, other species began to look at humans differently. These small, soft creatures with no claws and no armor, they were not what they seemed. They were something new, something unexpected, something that could not be easily categorized or controlled. They were persistence predators. They did not stop. They did not tire. They did not forget. And when they chose to protect something, the whole galaxy learned to listen. When a predator cub cried in pain, a human roared louder, and the pack fell silent. This was the story that would be told for generations, passed from species to species, world to world. The story of how one human, one impossible human, changed everything by refusing to look away. By choosing to be human. And in the end, that was the most dangerous thing of all.